We're looking at Psalm 132 today. Lord, remember David and all of his afflictions. The idea that there's a promise that God made, that Jehovah made to David, and he's going to see this through. This is remembrance of reminding God of who David was and what David had promised, and what the desire of David's heart was to make a place of rest for God, that God could come and rest with his people and rest in Jerusalem and rest at a place where the Ark of the Covenant would be placed. Lord, remember David and all of his afflictions, how he swore unto Yahweh, and swore by Elohim of Jacob, I will not come into the tabernacle of my house, nor go up into my bed. I will not give sleep to mine eyes, nor slumber to my eyelids, until I find a place for Yahweh, an habitation for the mighty God of Jacob. Lo, we heard it at Ephratah. We found it in the wood, in the fields of the wood. We will go into his tabernacles. We will worship at his footstool. To create a place for God to dwell, that we might worship him. That is the heart's cry of David right here. And it's interesting that he mentions Ephratah, because Bethlehem Ephratah is where the real king of David, the real Davidic promise, the promise that goes through the Davidic line that God made to David, will happen at Ephratah. And he wants to make a place for worship, and he wants to worship. Arise, O Lord, unto thy rest, thou and the ark of thy strength. A place where God is not moving from place to place. First he came in, he stayed at Shiloh. Then he went down in the Philistines. Then he came up to Kirjath Jearim. Then he came back over. Now he's been taken over to the city of David. He left for a little while, then came back, and now he's there. And David's back. You know, when David came back with Absalom. But the idea is the ark has been moving around. God's been moving around. And God didn't have a problem with that. He earlier states with David that I didn't tell you to make this place for me. And yet he has this heart's cry to make a place for him. Find a place for rest, let thy priest be clothed with righteousness, and let thy saints shout for joy. For thy servant David's sake, turn not away the face of thine anointed. The idea that I want the presence of the anointed. I want to be in the presence of the face of the anointed. This idea that this is all about wanting to be with his God. The Lord has sworn in truth unto David, he will not turn from it, nor the fruit of his body, and will set it upon the throne. If my children keep my covenant and my testimony, then I will teach them. Their children also shall sit on the thrones forevermore. There's a small little conditional here, where we see that many of the kings of Judah did not follow. But then we did have a strong man that did, like Hezekiah and Josiah, some of the others. This is my rest forevermore. Here will I dwell, for I have desired it. Once again, this is something to dwell with his people. It's funny how we have two parties that desire and want to be together. You have David and you have God. And they want to be together, and they create this place and work together to establish this so that the anointed might be with his people. This is my people. I am their God. And that the people would want to be in the place where the anointed is. And it talks about he will, and it's talking about God will bless and satisfy the poor with bread, and clothe the priest with salvation, and the saints shall shout for joy. There will I make the horn of David to bud. This is the horn is also the place of judgment, the places of justice, the places of peace, the leadership of David. His enemies will I clothe with shame, but upon him shall his crown flourish. The idea of the kingship will never leave, and it'll be an abundant kingship. Again, this psalm is about two parties wanting to be together, and their hearts cry and their desire to be within one another. This is what God has wanted. He's wanted his people to be in spirit and in truth, not just, well, I'll make you a house, here's a place for you, and I'll have my place over here, and we'll play cards from time to time. David had a heart to be with his God, and that's what we see in 132. Very nice, heartfelt psalm. Going back to 2 Samuel, of course, Absalom has been killed, and the king has been brought back. Judah came to bring him back. Israel came also to bring him back, but Israel has been fighting, over who gets the king and who has the right for the king and all this kind of stuff. We see this little infighting becomes a problem, a small civil war that happens you know, in chapter 20, where we had David. We have David coming back, and he's been brought back with Israel and with Judah. But a fellow named Sheba is called a man of Belial. This is not a place. Belial is not a place. It is a rebellion spirit. And so he is from the Benjamites, and he blew a trumpet and said, "We have no part in David, neither shall we inheritance in the son of Jesse, every man to his tents, O Israel." This is a call to break up again. We're going to go to our tents. You have to come to us. If you want something from us, we're going to be over there. That's really kind of what he's saying. We're going to go to our tents, and we're going to establish ourselves, and you can establish yourself over here. He wants to break up Israel and Judah. God doesn't want this right now, but David doesn't either. So every man of Israel went up after David and followed Sheba, but the men of Judah stayed with the king. And there's an interesting side note here, that when David comes back into the land, he finds these 10 women that he left behind to watch the house, and they had been raped, molested by his son Absalom. But this was also in fulfillment of a curse that God had made, that his sins would be seen by Israel in the sight of the son. So this was really David's fault that this happened. Everything that's happening, all this trickle down comes from God cursing David. And so these 10 concubines that were left, and you sit in your mind and think of 10 women sitting around that had that happen to them in the light of the sun, the shame of what happened for everyone to see. And when they say see it, not just seeing with their eyes, but they knew about it. It came to the knowledge that it happened. And it was very shameful that he was abhorring the king by doing this to the concubines. And so he did this, and David shut them up and took care of them, and they lived as widows for the rest of their lives. He did not go back into them. They had been taken by Absalom. And so he takes care of them, though. He doesn't just send them off. And he talks to Amasa, and he wants to assemble Judah. So he assembles Judah. And so David also talked to Abishai. Now, Abishai is the brother of Joab. Now, remember, David replaced Joab with Amasa. I don't think this set very well with the brothers, but okay. But he waits for Amasa to go and bring about Judah so that they might be ready to go against Israel. And he also tells Abishai to do the same thing. So this person, Sheba, is going to do more harm than Absalom. So he takes Joab and the Cherethites and the Pelethites. Remember the Pelethites. Remember these mercenaries that were on David's side. They're on the king's side. They're in the king's army, but they weren't of Israel. He takes them, and they go out of Jerusalem and pursue Sheba. And when they came to Gibeon, which is on the outskirts, farther down the road, it's over near Shiloh. They come up to Gibeon, and Amasa is wearing the robes of the captain of the Lord's host. He's wearing Joab's robes. This is what God gave him. This is what David gave him. This was his authority, was wearing this robe. Joab comes up, brings him forward, is going to talk with him in private, and stabs him and kills him. And it's a very sad thing that happens here. You go into it more in depth about how this murder happened. It wasn't just a stab and dead. He stabs him between the fifth rib, and this is like a disembowelment, which was, and this would be blood coming out. It would be very painful. And so he died, but he didn't die quickly. He wallows in his blood. He's moaning and groaning. They move him off the highway and cover him up. And the people still knew what had happened, but they were moving on. And this was very shameful, what happened to this man of God. When I say this man of God, when I say this man that's following the man of God, who's being obedient to the king who took this place. He didn't ask to be, as far as I see. But what happens is he is in Joab's place. And remember, Joab and Abishai are brothers. So again, we see conspiracies left and right all over 2 Samuel. People conspiring for power, and Joab is hungry for power, and he's moving back and forth. Many of the innocents that are only doing what the king asked are getting in the firing line. So far, we had Abner that was killed by Joab. Now we have Amasa is killed. And God takes care of this later on with Solomon. We're going to see an interesting typology happen here, a figurativism that happens, that justice happens. God does not just wink at stuff. He'll take care of it later. but he will take care of it. We're going to see that with Shimei. We're going to see that with Joab. We're going to see that in a minute. Sense of justice. Some people think that he's not going to move on little players. He's concentrating only on the big picture. But we see that that's not true. At the end of David's life, he tends to go back and give an accounting for the next king. It's like he's dovetailing everything. He's going to take care of everything from David back that was unjust. He's going to deal with Joab. He's going to deal with Shimei. He's going to deal with some of these players. And then when the new king has, his other things going on, there's this, kind of a break right here. I've taken care of everything from the reign of Solomon, from the end of David and the beginning of Solomon back. And there's the sense of justice, in the sense that God does keep these little things in mind, even though he's concentrating on the nation of Israel, even though he's concentrating on solidifying David, but he also has this curse that's going through. He's got all this little infighting and all these little conspiracies. He holds these people accountable for their actions within all of this. Later on, we'll find out that he does judge Babylon for how Babylon treated the Jews, even though it was God's will to judge Israel with the Babylonians. He also sees in Jeremiah where many of these nations got judged for how they treated the Jews. It's like the Jews got spanked by God and everybody else is throwing rocks. They needed to back up and let God take care of Israel, and stay out of that. But then they also turned it into a gang fight. You ever seen one person, two people are fighting, and then all of a sudden it becomes a gang war? That's not what God wanted. He wanted to judge Israel, and everybody else needs to stand clear and let him judge and then redeem and then restore. That's his idea: judgment, redemption, and restoration. So this is going to happen. He's going to judge all these characters at the beginning of the reign of Solomon. So we see the death of Amasa here, and he's wallowing in his blood off to the side of the highway, and the people are going by. They cover him up, and Joab goes through and brings all the people, and he's going against Sheba. Sheba has gone and taken his people, and he's trying to create a coup against David. And Joab replaces Amasa and goes after, maybe trying to get political points, I don't know. But he goes and finds a city where Sheba has gone into, and he's going to attack the city and just level the city. Remember, this was what David was afraid Absalom was going to do, that Absalom would come in and just level Jerusalem. There's this city, it's called Beth Machan, and that's where Sheba and his forces had gone to. And he's going to go attack that city and just probably level it to the ground. And what happens is a wise woman comes up. And again, you'll see this happening. These wise women come up. You'll see this happening very often. She comes up to talk to Joab. Hold on. And she finds Joab, and he listens to her. And she wants to find out what the problem is. She has been a leader there. Get the idea that she was a prophetess, and that she spoke peaceably and faithfully in Israel, that she led there very peacefully, like a Deborah character, in this area. So why would you want to come and wipe us all out? We've been nothing but faithful to Israel. And Joab says, well, I'm not here to get you. I'm here to get Sheba. So you just send Sheba's head out, and we'll call it a day. We're done with this. We'll move on. So she goes in and has the men of the city, because Sheba has lifted his hand against David. So the woman went in with the people, and in her wisdom, they cut off the head of Sheba and sent it out to Joab. And Joab moved on. He took all of his mercenaries with him and all his troops with him and left the area. And it's funny how I'm thinking about what happened also with the wife of Jael and Sisera. Remember in the book of Judges how he went to fight against Israel. He got kicked back. He was resting someplace. He thought he was safe. And she goes in and takes a nail. This is the wife of Jael back in Judges, and hits him between the temple and kills him. Again, these wise women are popping up. You had Deborah was a wise woman. They're popping up and doing what needs to be done in the situation. And she gets glory for what she's doing here. This story is mostly about her, and even has her words as she speaks to Joab. So we have these players moving back into position. But the problem is, in talking about justice and judgment, is what I was talking about. We see in 21 that even 3 years later, we're moving down to about 3 years, David's getting older. He's getting ready to die. But God wants to settle accounts. It's like he's going to finish off one chapter and start new with Solomon. And so he's going to judge these people. First of all, he has a famine that gets everybody's attention. It lasts for 3 years, and this tells David that God's up to something. So he says this famine is to get your attention because of what Saul did in wiping out the Gibeonites. Now remember, back in Joshua, that Joshua was told to go wipe out all the Amorites and wipe them out, clean them like a dish. But the Gibeonites deceived him in saying, we are from a long ways away, and we just want to make league with you, so you don't wipe us out. And Joshua didn't ask the Lord. He goes ahead and makes this promise that he will keep the Gibeonites safe. Well, come to find out, they were neighbors. They were just down the road, and they were Amorites. But because he made this vow, he now had to keep it. Well, Saul broke that vow. He went and slew the Gibeonites. So the king goes to the Gibeonites and finds out, well, what can we do to make this right? God wants to make it right. What would you like? And so we don't want his gold. We don't want his silver. We don't want his stuff like that. You know, the man that consumed us and that devised against us these things, we should be destroyed from remaining in any of the coast of Israel. The idea that Saul was not just killing a few, he was doing genocide. And Saul did that. As an evil king, he would go and try to do genocide against. Now, there were places that God told him to wipe people out like a dish. But when you do it on your own, you're not allowed to do that. God has his reasons for moving against nations. And remember what we said about justice. Remember in Judges, where the king had his thumbs and his big toes cut off, and he goes, well, I did this to 10 other kings. These places that God judges and wipes out is treating that way. It's because that's how they treated their neighbors. It is justice, because this is what we did to our neighbors. But to do it to somebody who didn't have that track record is not justice. It's vengeance, and it's just basically it's just murder. Saul tried to wipe out the Gibeonites, and give us 7 of his sons, and we're going to hang those sons from the trees as justice, as the penalty for what Saul did. And so, okay, to make this right before God and to clean up justice here, David sends 7 sons of Saul, or in Saul's household. These would probably be grandsons of that son lineage. He saves Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, from this because of the vow he made to Jonathan. Now we'll see, interestingly enough, that one of the king's son was named Mephibosheth. But it was not Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan. This was a different Mephibosheth along the line of David. Sometimes you'll find these guys will have similar names or the same names, but they're in a different family, different mother kind of thing. So he takes 2 of those. Here's an interesting thing to note. Michal, remember that Michal was given back to David? David got his wife back, but she despised him and had no kids from him. But she had 5 kids from the other guy that she had been married to. Remember, she was promised to David. Then Saul gave her to someone else, and then David wanted her back because it was his right, because it was a covenant agreement with the king and him. So he takes Michal back. But Michal had 5 sons from this other guy. So they take Michal's sons. And interesting enough, Michal was also married to someone from Bezalel. Remember the cool guy? The guy that provided all the stuff when they were away in the wilderness, and provided all the beds and the clothing and the pots and pans and a lot of, you know, sheep and cheese and fruits and vegetables and all this to take care of these people in the wilderness. Michal was married to a guy who was kin to him. So you see these connections all over the place. It isn't like there's a ton of people in here mentioned that aren't connected in some way, somehow, to someone else in the story. There's very few loose ends here. So Michal goes, and they take them, they deliver them to the Gibeonites, and the Gibeonites hang them on a tree. One of the moms, not Michal, but one of the moms goes, and she took sackcloth and spread it on a rock, and she went over and fought against the birds to keep the birds away from the bodies of her sons. And then later on, David went and took down the men. They had served the purpose of justice before God. He even starts settling some accounts here. He goes and finds the bones of Saul, and the bones of Jonathan from the men of Jabesh Gilead. Remember at the end of 1 Samuel that Jonathan and Saul had been murdered, and the Philistines took and cut off their head and laid their bodies against the wall, and the men of Jabesh Gilead took and stole in and took the bodies away and took care of the bones and hid them off. David finds out where those are, brings them back to Benjamin, and there they are. He made a sepulcher for them. And after he'd done these acts of justice for the horrors that had happened at war and with all the struggle, God entreats and moves away. So again, looking at this from this overall godly need for justice is what 21 is about so far. So we see that God has this sense of justice, that God wants these things to happen. He's going to have these things happen. And when we see this characteristic of God, we have to see that many times when we think of America and we think of our own selves, we think that God doesn't care. He does care. He's going to solidify Israel, and then he's going to take care of America and Brazil and Spain and Belgium and all these other nations. But solidifying Israel will come first, but he's going to judge for how people have treated other people, how groups have treated other groups, even going back decades about how for justice. He's going to set up justice. God is going to be a just God. That's why we need his mercy. If you don't have his mercy, you'll get his justice. The Philistines act up again here at the end of 21. And so David is going out to war. But what happens is you see some giants here. This is interesting. You got a lot of giants playing here. These giants come out of Philistines. And you'll also find that the brothers of Goliath are here. Now you got to think about it. David killed Goliath probably 40 years in the past, 40 to 50 years, but these guys are still alive and still bearing a grudge. And there's all these giants there. And so it talks about these giants that come out, and they have like the same types of spears, and they're giants and they're big. They have a new sword, and this one guy, Ishbi-Benoth, he wants to kill David, but Abishai goes in and kills him. And they tell David to stay out of the battle. They're wanting to kill you, so David goes away. We get this guy named Sabichai, and he goes and kills a giant. Then we have Elhanan. He goes and kills the brother of Goliath, the Gittite. So again, these giants are being killed. Once again, we can also see this overarching type of justice over how the Philistines had treated Israel. So again, God is moving in justice here. And he's taking care of some of these remnants. I mean, remember when they were asked to go in to the promised land, they saw Jericho and many of these places, and they said there were giants in there. These were literal giants, you know, 13 feet tall, you know, 300 pounds of muscle, you know, with these big spears and metal coats of arms and all of these. They were big and formidable and mighty to the flesh. To the spirit, they weren't so much. So we're going to kill giants. It says here there was a battle in Gath, which is down in Philistines, and there was a man of great stature that had 6 fingers and 6 toes. He had 6 fingers on every hand. He had 6 toes. He had 24 instead of 20. The idea of talking about digits. And he was born, and he was a giant. And he defied Israel, and Jonathan, the son of Shemiah, the brother of David, slew him. These 4 were born of the giant at Gath and fell at the hand of David and his servants. So David takes care of these giants. These men go in, they're not afraid. The Philistines are acting up, and he goes and slaughters these giants. And it isn't just David killing giants anymore. It is his mighty men are killing giants. We're going to talk about some of these guys when we talk about Benaniah and some of these other guys who really went. And they slew giants. And they weren't afraid. They slew people of Moab who had faces like lions and were big and fierce in countenance, but they went in with the power of the Lord and slew. So we can't just rely on just David alone. We're supposed to be little Davids. We're supposed to be like his mighty men, going off and killing our own giants, not just saying David killed the giants, but it's our job also to attack and kill our own giants. And these giants are not physical, they're not flesh and blood. They're things inside of us, and there's sin, and there's temptation, and there's struggles. Those are the giants we need to kill, and for the glory of the King. A lot to be said here, but it's all coming to a head. We're getting ready to go from David to Solomon, and we're going to see some distinctives, and we're going to see a change of command, and it is good now, and it's going to continue to stay good. Thank you.